Um, all right, thank you, folks. Good afternoon, and welcome to the meeting of the Housing Production Advisory Council. Damian Hall, co-chair. Hey, good to see everybody. Thanks for coming out with my fellow. I'm here with my fellow co-chair, JD Tuvey, as well. Let's kick this thing off. We've got a pretty full agenda today, and we're starting with, I believe we have nothing on the consent agenda, so we can just slide right past that. And then a word from Matthew about the process.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chair Hall. As always, for council members as well as members of the public, just to give a quick overview of the HPAC process, the HPAC has broken up into 5 work groups that have been meeting regularly to talk through different topics, barriers, recommendations to help increase housing production across the state of Oregon. Those work groups develop potential recommendations and they send them to the full council for a 3-reading process. First reading is the introduction of the recommendation to the full council and the public. The second reading is the opportunity for the public to provide comment and testimony, either written or during a meeting. And then the third is a discussion and vote amongst the council members. And so, as always, if folks have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and you are also able to submit your testimony and get more information on the governor's website under the Housing Production Advisory Council webpage.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. So we have on our agenda recommendations that are in both the first, second, and third reading. We're going to start off with the second reading on workforce strategy recommendation in finance, and what that entails is an opportunity for us to receive public comment from folks who are on the line here for the meeting. As members of the council may have seen, we have received a substantial amount of written public comment, so we'll be taking that in and updating recommendations in response. But for today, I think we're starting off with the workforce strategies recommendation, and anybody who is signed up for public comment, now is the time. Matt, you want to call on people?
Sure thing. So this is one of the recommendations that has been carried forward. And so we've carried for the testimony. We may have some folks that are not in attendance. So the first person who had signed up from a few meetings ago, Robert Westerman. And I do not see Robert in the list of attendees. So if you are under a different name, please raise your hand. Okay. We also have on the list from a previous sign-up, Ryan Leffel, who I don't see in the list. So if you are there, raise your hand. Also from a previous meeting sign-up who may not be here today is Ariel Nelson. And then finally from a previous sign-up, who we don't see is Lenny Ellis. So, it looks like those folks may have signed up a few meetings ago and aren't with us today. So if there's anyone else who would like to provide public comment on this recommendation, go ahead and raise your hand. The first person with a hand raised is Chris Hewitt.
I think I'm signed up as, this is Ryan Leffel, actually.
Oh, great.
You called on before, so I work with Chris. So I'll get started here. So specifically, I'm talking about the ratios. So I'm Ryan Leffel. I'm an environmental and construction safety instructor for the Oregon laborers. We're a state registered apprenticeship program for construction craft laborers. I started my construction career in 1994. As I said, I'm talking about ratios today. The attention apprentices receive in the form of classroom, hands-on, journey worker, OJT, is key to developing that safe and productive workforce. The best safeguard we have in place to protect that proven system is the apprentice journey worker ratio. As you've seen in the news lately, teachers have been in the news a lot. Always when there are contract negotiations or education issues, class size is always a hot topic, and that's for good reason because the ratios do matter. Expansion of the ratio to a 4-to-1, 4 apprentices to 1 journey worker would only serve to diminish the quality of learning our apprentices receive. And that ratio could represent a reduction in direct oversight of the apprentice by the journey worker by as much as 75%, maybe more. A major impact that could cause is on safety. The HPAC, your standards for analysis document that you put out, had some information in there comparing Oregon and Washington ratios and fatality rates in construction. That assertion was either incomplete or uninformed at best, maybe disingenuous at worst, because fatalities, while they are the most severe safety outcome, they are certainly not the most prevalent. So they're not the only metric. Non-fatal occupational injuries and illnesses far outnumber fatalities across the industry and trades. So I think, you need more to look more deeply into that. We could also experience reduced or slower graduation rates because apprentices do need that attention to advance through the program. Productivity could suffer. Everybody on the job site has productivity expectations, and if you're diluting journey worker ability to produce by increasing the amount of teaching and spreading them thin, that's going to definitely affect productivity for the project as a whole. Other things that get affected when those things are also affected is quality of work. Redoing work, doing things twice is never good. So all that can also affect schedule and budget. So I believe more research needs to be done and discussion needs to happen, including maybe a deeper pool of stakeholders, including construction industry experts, like apprenticeships, unions, contractors, and safety professionals. And thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of this topic.
Thank you so much. Okay, that is the only person with their hand raised. So if there is anyone else who would like to provide comment, raise your hand now.
And just a reminder to anybody who may be on the line listening in or watching a recording of this after the fact, this recommendation is on its second reading. It will be coming back to the council in a future meeting for the third reading. You will have the opportunity to provide written response and comments anytime before we bring it back. So feel free to engage that way as well.
Great. Thank you, Co-Chair Hall. So with that, we will move to the SDC recommendation. We had nobody sign up in advance to provide testimony on this recommendation. So if there's anybody who'd like to provide testimony, please raise your hand now. First up, Ethan Nelson.
Hello, everybody. Ethan Nelson from the City of Eugene, Intergovernmental Relations Manager. I think we've shared this during the Finance Committee. You're working on this. I believe that the intention is really good on this in terms of how to finance infrastructure. I do believe that this recommendation could benefit from going back to the committee and having more input from municipal finance and engineering departments to talk through like how it would actually work loaning against future SDC revenues is more than likely not a major tool that many municipalities are going to be utilizing to finance infrastructure. And what I've been hearing from a lot of our my colleagues across the state is that we really support the efforts of the HPAC related to making recommendations to the legislature on increasing direct grants and funding to municipalities for infrastructure projects that would benefit the entire system so that we can advance more buildable lands. So I'm not sure that this recommendation meets that need. So I just make the request that there would be more time with the finance committee and actually pull in some of SDC experts at the municipal level. Thanks.
Thank you, Ethan. Next up, Barry Thalden. Barry, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Great. Thank you. I wasn't planning to speak at this meeting, but since you are talking about SDCs, we've had a lot of conversations about that. One of the things that could be recommended is that there be a difference in SDC schedules for affordable housing. It's one thing, just talking about a specific instance that we're involved in, building affordable housing in Medford. If you're building a $2 million house in Medford, the SDCs amount to about $8,000. Drop in the bucket. If you're delivering houses for $200,000 as affordable housing, and the SDCs amount to the same amount, $8,000, it's huge. So I just make that recommendation for consideration.
Thank you, Barry. And that looks like that is all of the people we have that are interested in testifying.
All right, and I think Justin, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just, for the good of the order, because I think a lot of people don't understand this about SDCs, and I think this creates a lot of confusion. So I just wanted to say that one of the important things to remember is SDCs by state statute can't be a tax. And they actually have to be based on impact and demand. And so and trust me, I build starter small projects, but you have to be able to, by state law, you have to be able to make a clear delineation between the fact that a large 4,000 square foot house puts more demand on the transportation system or the park system or the sewer system, whatever, than a smaller unit. And so that's part of the reason. It's like, if we start saying we're just going to charge it based on the size of the house, then it becomes a tax and not a SDC, which is based on usage. So I think that's just important for us all to remember and for the public to understand about SDCs.
And Co-Chair Hall, looks like 2 additional folks put their hand up. Next up will be and again, this is to the SDC recommendation, Barbara Fryer.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing my testimony. I know you, this is after the point when you said you were going to close the testimony, and I basically wanted to add what Mr. Wood just stated about the legal basis of SDCs, and we cannot make up. I'm from the city of Cornelius, and we do charge SDC fees, and we cannot make up an SDC if we are required to charge less for an affordable housing development. There's no way to make up that deficit. So at least the way that state law is written today. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And then the last individual is Brock Nation.
I can hear me right.
Sound great.
Awesome. We submitted written testimony as well, and it does touch on several recommendations. I can just direct you guys to read that, or if you prefer, I can just read off our testimony real quick.
You've got 3 minutes, so whatever comments you'd like to share. We are talking about the SDC recommendation at the moment.
Oh, sounds good. Co-chairs Hall and Tovey and members of the Housing Production Advisory Council, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. My name is Brock Nation. I'm the Policy Director of Oregon Realtors, and I'm here to express our support for many of the today's third reading recommendations. The expedited UGB expansion recommendation would address several barriers to housing production, including ensuring lands annexed into UGBs are development ready, supporting the development of all housing tenures and price points, and speeding up the rate of housing production by ensuring dialogue between developers and permitting agencies related to expedited review and approval of timelines. According to the Barriers to Housing Production in Oregon brief by the University of Oregon, the supply of buildable land is related to 3 of the top 12 extreme barriers to housing production in Oregon. Importantly, there are carefully considered sideboards to ensure the protection of our state's natural and working lands, ensuring that our state will be a more affordable and equally desirable place to live. Further, Oregon Realtors supports the recommendations to increase the number of apprentices in construction and construction-related trades, as well as the recommendation to provide additional options for how system development charges are ultimately paid. The University of Oregon's briefing demonstrated that limited supplies of labor and the lack of financing for infrastructure are broadly agreed upon production barriers by the private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector alike. Several recommendations before you today, including the recommendations regarding modifications to residential permit review standards, land use review standards, hearing time standards, and land use appeal procedures, will directly help speed up development and construction approval timelines. It's essential to reduce these timelines as Oregon is already underproduced by 140,000 units, and we need to produce between 550 to 600,000 new units to account for forecasted population growth by 2040. This will require a substantial increase in annual housing production, something that's more achievable if approval timelines are reduced. The time that it currently takes to get projects approved is not just a housing issue, but also an issue of social and economic equity. The longer it takes for new units to come to the market, the higher the cost of each unit will be, and the longer it will take to see meaningful declines in the rate of housing price growth due to continued imbalances between housing supply and demand, an issue that, if left unaddressed, will continue to disproportionately impact our most vulnerable communities. We thank the members of the council for their diligent work to identify meaningful solutions to Oregon's housing crisis. Your efforts, including the recommendations you're considering today, will have a positive impact on the lives of all current and future Oregonians. Thank you for your time and consideration of our comments.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, that concludes public comment. For Chair Hall.
All right. Thank you, Matt, and thank you to the folks who took the time to come and speak to us this afternoon. So moving on in our agenda, we've got a number of recommendations that are up for the third reading. So I think we're just going to jump into that. We're a little ahead of schedule, but let's start at the top here. We've got Deb chairing the availability of land work group to talk about the expedited UGB expansion process. And so just a reminder, this is third reading, so the idea is that very briefly kind of summarize what's going on with the recommendation, what's changed since the council's seen it last, and then have any discussion questions, comments that councilors would like to make, and then with the ultimate objective of hopefully voting on tentative approval or not if we don't have the numbers of each of these recommendations. So I'll turn it over to Deb. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Co-Chair Tovey. I'm sorry, Co-Chair Hall. Sorry.
No worries.
Governor, excuse me. Good afternoon, fellow HPAC committee members. Today, the Land Availability Work Group is bringing forward the third reading of the expedited UGB expansion, with basically 2 primary changes from the initial recommendation. For clarification, the changes that we are discussing or are bringing forward are due largely to the comments of the work group based on public comment and clarification and or suggestions and feedback from DLCD. The 2 items that we are recommending changes on are, number 1, strengthening the urban reserve language. we are adding a requirement that cities that opt into the expedited UGB expansion must complete an urban reserve within 5 years, which will be technically and financially assisted and supported by DLCD. Secondly, we will be adding a need metrics to the criteria. So cities opting into the expedited UGB expansion must show need by utilizing an objective metric. And we have included in the recommendation that this should not be an onerous process and that there is discretion in regards to the metric. As many of you may have seen, that the governor's draft framework for the housing production proposal for the short session was sent out to the committee. And there was a couple of items that were suggested in regards to need. And in our recommendation, we are supporting those items as viable items if that was to be considered moving forward. Lastly, in the governor's draft framework housing production proposal, the intent was to bring the HB 3414 forward in the short session. And we are recommending the importance of bringing our recommendation forward, strengthening the urban reserve piece of this, as well as supporting the governor's recommendation. I'm going to open it up for questions if anybody has questions.
All right. Questions, thoughts, comments, discussion from members of the council? Director Bateman, I see you got your hand up. Go right ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was assuming folks would be wondering what I was thinking, so I'll just jump in. Thank you. I asked for additional work on this recommendation as part of the work group. You know, I've said from the very beginning, even before this council started to convene, DLCD thinks it's possible to provide relief to local governments without bypassing state policies. So we asked for some additional strengthening of this recommendation, some additional sideboards and adjustments. And the one that was really important to me and to us was this demonstration of need. We want to be really clear that we don't want to create an analytical burden for our local partners, but we do not want to give away our land carte blanche, right? We wanted to see some demonstration of need. We think it's actually possible to develop a set of objective measures. These could be third-party generated, you know, something that we can all point to and agree to in terms of the methodology. It doesn't have to be homework or research that the local partners do themselves. So I think it's possible to get to that demonstration of need. For me personally, I see that being twofold. I see a need for land. I want to see that argument made in a robust way. And given our mission here, I'd like to see a demonstration of need for housing. I think some of the documents that are before us or that are floating around talk about a need for one or the other. I actually think both are really important, that they should travel together. What we did in our work group was point to the framework document that's out there to say this is one potential example of the type of metrics we're talking about, and didn't, you know, wholesale adopt those or take them word for word, something like that. And I do think the need for land and the need for housing should both be part of the metric, the objective metric that we are using in this instance. And then the other piece that I just wanted to note, and I'd love to have some discussion from this group, would be I'm concerned, and I really want to see as part of this UGB expansion, the housing that does get built, that at least 30% of it is truly affordable. And so I know there are some different numbers currently in the framework about the percent that would be percent of AMI for rentals versus percent of AMI for housing ownership. And I just kind of like to open up that discussion and see what folks think of that, if you're comfortable with that as being truly affordable, according to those definitions, what the sense of the group is. But I'm very pleased at where this language is going, considering where it came from. I think it's pointed in the right direction. It gives me greater comfort, and it is what I asked for. So I just wanted the group to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bateman. Really appreciate that. Yeah, and I appreciate all the work and discussion that's happened in the work group. You know, both before the recommendation was brought to us, but also in the, you know, the multi-reading process and the kind of iterative back and forth with not only the agency, but the written and oral testimony that we received that all got packaged up into the version of this recommendation we have before us. So thank you for all the work that went into that. Would anybody want to have any other comments, respond to some of the, I think we were prompted on, is there any discussion of calibrating the levels of affordability type of situation? And that I'm seeing a hand. And Tom, go right ahead.
I wanted to say thank you to Director Bateman. I mean, on face value, you know, this is a recommendation I would typically oppose if we were only looking at it without the nuance and the kind of implementation standards. And I think the tree recommendation is also a lightning rod, a bit in the same way as our wetlands. And I think, you know, this recommendation as it's written shows how the nuance is important, the detail is important, and there are ways that we can accommodate housing growth while still, you know, doing our best job and the job we need to do with regard to preserving our natural resources. So I just wanted to say thank you to Chair Flagan of that work group, and then also Director Bateman and the work group and the committee for that.
And any further discussion, thoughts on the draft, any of the recent changes to the draft? I see Deb, go ahead.
Co-Chair Hall, I would just like to speak before we move to a vote, or I would like to move to a vote, but I would like to just recognize that you know, personally, that there is opinions about this recommendations, and what I'm asking is that you consider what the governor has asked us to do from a housing production point of view, is to bring recommendations forward that can be considered. And we know that there will be much more discussion beyond this once it goes to the legislation. And so I'm just, I guess I'm asking for your support in moving this forward so there can be more discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. And Daniel, go ahead.
Just because the question's been thrown out there about affordability restrictions, I'm not wild about long-term restrictions on ownership. I think the recommendation as written for some parts include Deb, how much is it 60-year affordability period that you guys recommended?
It's 60.
I think that's tough when you go to someone and you say, you don't make enough money to be able to get a house affordably, so we're going to help you out. But for 60 years, we're going to make sure you can't build equity beyond a certain point. It kind of chafes at me a little bit. Having said that, it's a good recommendation, and all of the changes that have been made, I think, are taking it in the right direction. And I fully support it going for a tentative adoption. I just wanted to throw out my thoughts on the restriction duration.
All right, thank you, Dan. And that's a good observation. There's different ways to kind of, you know, time out when the equity is captured, and
that's going to get chewed to death by the legislature and a lot of other people. So I don't know that we need to really spend too much time on it. Those are my thoughts for the record.
All right, much appreciated. And then Natalie, go right ahead.
I just want to echo that I wonder about what the generational wealth are when we're just too much.
Hey, Natalie, I'm having a hard
People
time
can
hearing
do.
you. You're kind of cutting in and out.
Can you hear me now?
That sounds better. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to echo what Daniel said. I feel like I wonder what the impacts would be on generational wealth if we restrict what people can do in terms of reselling homes. So I just wanted to echo. I agree with the recommendation as it is laid out.
Right on. No, yeah, I appreciate that. And, it's a debate I've had with a couple affordable for sale home developers, right? And they different models, and you know, it's different outcomes, right? Like if we have long-term affordability that transfers between owners, right? Like this creates a, you know, access to some of the equity. So it's really kind of like a step up to you know, the financial impacts that you think of when you buy a first home versus if you know, sort of, I think the other end of the spectrum is say, you know, decrease the price, let somebody buy it, so you have to stay there for X amount of years, but then you can capture the entire equity on the first sale. Then it's really, you know, that first buyer gets, you know, that kind of equity comparable to a market rate home, as opposed to spreading it out over time to different buyers, et cetera. So, you know, either way, I think, you know, it's not really a right or wrong. It's just sort of which outcome do we want, and that type of a thing. So I do agree with what Dan said, that that's one that gets will be discussed and sort of, you know, weighed by a number of groups. But I can see the positive to both of those kind of things. You know, creation of generational wealth and in the short term versus kind of like having an affordable unit in the long term. So, you know, and I think both of those types of developments are happening out there in the world, and so I don't. The state will weigh in about which they think they want to incentivize. So, all right, and anything additional? JD, I see you're off mute. You want to go ahead, man?
Yeah, I was just going to echo. You said exactly what I was going to say. There's a lot of models, land trusts, there's other things that kind of either sliding scale or, you know, it's not like a cutoff in 60 years or whatever. It's a sliding scale over time. So the longer you're there, the less you have to kind of be impacted by that long-term kind of holdback, you know, in order to be able to enjoy the full valuation of the properties. But no, I totally agree with you and what people have said. As I think this is a good way to start the conversation on how to transition people from out of affordability, getting homes affordable now, and then transition them into other things in the future is a good starting conversation.
So further conversation, thoughts, comments on affordability or any of the topics that are packaged in this recommendation? Hearing none, I'm going to take us to voting, and you know, we will have an opportunity for additional discussion if things you know, pop in your head here. But I would accept a motion to approve.
Chair Hall, I think Karen has her hand up.
Oh,
I only have my
yeah,
hand up to be the motion. I would love
right
to have a motion to approve. I believe this is a solid recommendation that should move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. Much appreciated. We have a motion to approve the expedited UGB expansion recommendation. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Thank you, Alyssa. And then this is moved and seconded. We've got a pending motion. Any further discussion before we do the voting? Senator Jama, go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair Hall, Co-Chair Hall. I'm going to be abstaining this today because, as you know, this issue is going to come in front of the legislation. legislatively, so I need to create space for more dialogue about this. So I'm going to be abstaining. It doesn't mean that I don't support, but I think I really appreciate the work that went through this process. So that's where I am. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Senator Jama. Any further discussion from the group before we do the roll call? All right, hearing none. Matt, would you go ahead and do a roll call vote for us?
Sure thing, Co-Chair Hall. Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Abstain.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you, folks. And thanks again to the Availability Land Work Group and Deb, the chair of that group, for all the work that went into this. I know there's a lot of discussion and a number of iterations, so thank you so much. So we have a number of other recommendations that are on their third reading. I believe 5 of which are from the Land Development and Permit Applications Work Group. And we've got Eric I'll kick it over to you to talk about those. And let's just start at the top with the cottage cluster and utility requirements recommendation.
Real quick, Co-Chair Hall, I just want to do a time check. I just calculated out we have about 9 minutes per item. So I just want to just for information and discussion.
No, that's good to know. All right. Thank you, JD. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks very much. I'll be presenting some of these, and I think Natalie will be handling a couple with Tom and Corey. So the cottage cluster proposal, we haven't made any amendments, any changes from the original version. Just the spirit of the thing was that we were going to try to leave it as kind of not flesh out the details to a degree that ties the hands of cities. They have concerns about having a shared sewer line or shared water services. Other jurisdictions are currently allowing for shared utility services, and we think it's really a major impediment to not permit this for middle housing and cottage clusters specifically. So we are looking forward to the other piece of it are the not requiring courtyards in up to 5 units. There was a little bit of testimony that was feeling that we needed to have that, but I think really it does end up creating a product and a design that is sometimes much worse by requiring that courtyard. So that's from testimony from the private side. So anyway, that's sort of the basic outline of what we're proposing, and look forward to comments and questions.
All right, folks, who has some comments, questions, thoughts, or discussion about cottage clusters, now would be a great time to kick that off. don't feel any pressure. We can vote without a discussion if people are feeling like that we've covered this. We have had 2 prior readings. All right, I'm not seeing any hands go up, but you know, feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts on this, and we will move to. Oh, we have a hand. Director Bateman, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. We had provided some technical comments about ways to refine the definition of cottage cluster and a couple other tweaks or modifications that would get us more comfortable with this language. Is this still the original language that came before the big group? We've had no amendments to this one in the process. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the sort of the idea behind that was that we were that we'd have sort of 2 different types of cottage cluster, and I think that's definitely a possibility. We thought it at least would make the recommendation become quite cumbersome, so we kind of, in an effort to try to kind of keep them simple and streamlined, we sort of think that would be an option to pursue, but not necessarily included in the language of this recommendation.
Riley, go ahead, sir.
I move we accept the recommendation.
All right, we have a motion for preliminary approval of the cottage cluster, courtyard and utility requirements recommendation.
Second.
We have a second. All right, we're moving. Do we have any further discussion? All right, hearing none. Matt, take it away with the roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
I'll abstain. Thank you.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you, folks. And let's kick it back over to Eric to do a quick rundown on the residential permit review standards recommendation.
Yep, and I'll turn that over to Natalie.
All right. Go ahead, Natalie.
Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if you saw, but we submitted a couple of changes to the recommendation based off of the testimony that we got. Specifically, we adopted most of the language that Jonathan Balcamo with the City of Albany had suggested. So we removed the mandatory 120 days to review and changed it so that jurisdictions have basically they have 40 days for the first review and then 20 days for every subsequent review. And then jurisdictions have 5 business days to verify the applications related to housing have what they need in order to conduct the review. So those are the basic changes we made. Everything else remains the way it was before.
All right. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you to the Land Development Permit Work Group. Matt, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Co-Chair Hall. Just from a technical standpoint, we did not get a chance to distribute the updated recommendation. So if there is a motion on this, I would advise that the motion just include specifically listing out those changes that Councilmember Janney just listed out.
Okay, and do we have the capability to just put a red line version on the screen right now?
Yeah, sure thing. Give me 1 second.
All right, perfect.
Are you accepting a motion?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to open it up for discussion first and keep the order. But anybody want to talk about it before we make a motion? Director Bateman, go right ahead.
I feel so chatty today. I don't know what's coming over me.
We encourage it, please.
I just wanted to note that we had also submitted some comments on this one as well, and particularly the tie that the Public Works folks have to really a broader network of agencies, state agencies out there on the landscape. And so we were looking for a little bit more wording or commitment to interagency collaboration and check-in in the crafting of some of this. I don't think, necessarily all of it lies with the Public Works departments. And so I'll probably abstain on this. I wanted to see just a little bit more input from my sister agencies as part of this. So I'll abstain.
Just to respond to that, I will say that I believe there is wording in the recommendation that says that these timeframes are, well, for one, I thought that comment was related to the 120-day approval criteria, and we removed that language from the recommendation. But I believe there's language in here that talks about that these timelines are specific just to the agency that is reviewing. So they're not being penalized for the delay from another agency.
Okay, I'll take another look. Thank you.
Right on. Yeah, and I appreciate that the kind of iterative time windows that this establishes. So if the agency gets behind, it's possible to catch up in the next review and do that timely as well, instead of just blowing the deadline and ending the process. So any further discussion, or we're going to move on to a motion?
I
I move approval as amended. Sorry, Deb.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to move approval of the recommendation as amended, which we just saw on the screen, the amendment, and Natalie just briefed us on as far as the changing of 120 days into kind of iterative clocks for each review. Any further discussion before we vote? All right, Matt, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Bunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajvaidya.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Yes.
Senator Anderson.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
I'll abstain. Thank you.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Fantastic. Thank you, folks. And then our next recommendation up is about requiring approval of certain land use design and development adjustments for residential development. Am I kicking over to Eric or Natalie?
Over to Tom.
Oh, Tom, go ahead, sir.
Okay, thanks, everybody. I'm not going to read through the entire recommendation. I don't think that's been our practice today. However, I will restate the overall kind of top line of the recommendation is requiring local jurisdictions to allow applicants by right adjustments of up to 20% from specified land use standards, not all land use standards. And there's an exhibit to the recommendation that I would encourage everybody to take a look at that details what those specific standards are with some precision. And a lot of the implementation standards and the standards that we're adhering to in this recommendation were cribbed off of a House bill, I think it was 3414. Forgive me if I'm not getting the number correctly, which did receive quite a bit of crafting, smithing input during its legislative process. There are specific capital A adjustments that are not included that are worth mentioning. So it does not allow a property, an adjustment to property not otherwise permissible under applicable zoning requirements. So it's not allowing changes or waivers to zoning. It is not including deviations from land use regulations relating to accessibility, ADA requirements, affordability, fire ingress or egress, or statewide land use planning goals relating to natural resources, natural hazards, the Willamette River Greenway, estuary resources, coastal shorelands, beaches, dunes, other ocean resources. So steering away from allowing any adjustments to recommendations around natural resources. Does not obviously allow a complete waiver of land use regulations nor deviations to requirements of building codes, federal, state, or water quality standard requirements. And with that, I will turn it back over for discussion and potential voting.
All right, thank you, Tom. Much appreciated. Dan, so you got your hand up. Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think this is a great recommendation. I fully support it. Having been a local code writer, as a planning commissioner, city councilor, I can tell you that over time this will lose effectiveness because it'll get baked into, well, if we really want it to be X amount of feet, we'll just lower it knowing that there's an adjustment. So I think this has some really good potential for immediate and near term, but it will wane over time. And our longer term solutions need to be focused around culture change of how bureaucracy interacts with housing production and shifting the conversation to being housing is a public good. Now, I don't have a brilliant solution for that, but I did want to go on record saying it. And I think this is a very good immediate step that we can take.
All right, thank you, Dan. Any follow-on comments? Gary, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Daniel in support as someone who actually very intimately works with all these, the rules and regulations of zoning. I know how many times I have come across basically at the edge of thinking that the project might die, like 60 units might die because like there isn't enough modification that allows for 1 extra feet or few inches, and so and when you are right at that point, you kind of are sort of thinking this, am I here to serve these zoning codes or am I here to provide housing, the 60 units, really comparing those. And so I think the rules should be there to really serve this production and not for us to be the slave of it. So in that sense, I really, really support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Further comments, discussion?
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of this recommendation.
Thank you. Motion accepted. Oh, and that was a second from Deb. Thank you as well. One more chance for discussion before we do some voting. All right, no takers. Matt, let's vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia. Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Yes.
Senator Anderson.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you all. And now on to the next recommendation to temporarily modify residential land use review process standards. And who's going to be speaking on that?
Gordon.
Thank
All right,
you,
go ahead.
Chair Eric Olson. So this one, briefly, we were talking about on a temporary basis as we emerge from the housing production emergency, or all housing development will be exempt from the public discretionary review or type 3 design review process or review by the council. So everything will be then decided by simplified type 2 administrative process that is already being used in almost all jurisdiction, and to have this decision within the 120-day review period. On this one, a lot of the testimonial, there was actually very few testimonial on this one, and they primarily talked about this probably not allowing for the public to have a voice on the development. And that is actually not the case, because the systems that are in place would not allow that, right? The type 2 process still has a robust public input phase. You still have to, even in type 2 process, you still have to notify all the neighborhood to a certain perimeter, and we all have to wait for that time period for them to recommend and comment on the development. So type 2 does not exclude any of that. So in that sense, I don't think we need to kind of worry about that. So we have not made any modification on this recommendation, and I would like to move it for a vote, and would hope that this would move on from the vote.
All right, thank you guys. Discussion, comments, thoughts of the council? I don't want to rush folks, but unless somebody puts your hand up, we're going to move on to voting. Or motions, pardon me, and then voting. I see Margaret, go right ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Hate when that happens. I really like this one, and I'm ready to move it to a vote.
And second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to preliminarily adopt the recommendation to temporarily modify residential land use review process standards. Any further discussion before we get on with the vote? Okay, hearing none. Matt, please do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Yes.
Senator Anderson.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Fantastic. Thank you, folks. And the last recommendation from the Land Development Permit Applications Work Group is about prohibiting suspension of plan review for residential development due to private utility design delays. And who would like to speak to us about that for a moment?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So this is a pretty simple recommendation. Essentially, the problems that we have, at least currently, is often our power companies typically drive the franchise utility designs. They have sometimes it'll take 6-7 months before we get a final design. And some jurisdictions allow you to allow plan review to continue in spite of that. Others do not. So we think that permitting or requiring that cities do not stop plan review during that process. They can certainly wait to get a final approval until those documents or those designs have been submitted. But it's just looking for a mechanism to sort of streamline the process. One small change from the public testimony that we wanted a clarification that this would add, this would be specifically applying to power, gas, and communication. There was testimony related to water districts and that it might potentially be considered to apply to those, and that was not the intention of this recommendation.
All right. Thank you, Eric, and thank you for that clarification and description of the recommendation here before the council. Any follow-on comments or discussion? Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we're talking about franchise utilities here primarily. And if cities raise the concern that, well, we can't give you an approval till we know what the power company's doing, where the pole is, then that's something they need to address in their franchise agreement when it comes up for renewal. That franchises are acting on behalf of the public under an agreement with a government, and the burden should be on government to ensure there's timely service from someone granted a franchise to operate in the public benefit. So I know it's difficult for local jurisdictions because they're constrained in certain aspects of franchise negotiation. There may need to be some statutory changes that give a little bit more leverage when it comes to the levers that a jurisdiction can pull during that negotiating process. But ultimately, this puts that burden on the government versus a private person who, if the government feels like they don't have leverage over the power company, try being a private citizen. And you're just like dealing with a railroad. So having said that, great recommendation. Happy to see it move forward.
Thank you, Dan. Good, concise explanation of why monopolies can be problematic. Any further conversation, discussion on the topic, on the recommendation before we move and vote?
I'll move tentative adoption of the recommendation.
I second it.
All right, moved and seconded. Final chance for discussion. All right, seeing none. Matt, go ahead and call the vote, please.
Councilmember Bunn,
Aye.
Councilmember Flagan,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey,
Yes.
motion passes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Great work. Thank you to the Land Development Permit Applications Work Group and all the hard work and conversation and time and effort that went into crafting those recommendations and recrafting them based on all the expert feedback that we received. I'm going to turn it over to Code and Design, and I believe Natalie. The plan is 3 more recommendations that are in the third reading. And then we'll take a break and then we'll do some first readings, if that works for the group. I'm seeing some nods, nobody's saying no. So let's go ahead and do it. Natalie, go ahead. If you go with start at the top with modify housing appeals and land use process recommendation.
Did we approve these at the last hearing? The first two, I thought like we did because there was no public comment.
No, they would
No?
still.
I made that up.
They go to second reading for public comment, and then they still come up for third reading for final approval. So
Okay,
they're just up for
I
vote.
dreamed it. It's a weird dream. Okay. So this first one is, which one's first again? Sorry.
Let's go with modify housing appeals land use procedures.
Okay. So this one would make all appeals would go to a hearings officer rather than going to a planning commission or city council. This one, we had some SME feedback from cities. They were generally in support because it's easier for a hearings officer who's trained in land use law. So we did not have any public testimony on this one. So we have made no changes.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Further comment or discussion? Seeing head shake. All right, then I would accept the motion to temporarily or tentatively approve the recommendation.
I move approval, tentative approval.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Seeing none, Matt, please do a vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Aye.
Councilmember Flagan,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Councilmember Jama, sorry, Senator Jama,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you, folks. And next recommendation is on modifying hearing time standards.
Yeah, so this one, since during a land use hearing, the burden falls to the applicant, there's times when staff reports can be, upwards of 30 minutes, and you can have literally hours of opposition testimony and you still only get 10 minutes as the applicant. So what this does is this would allow the applicant to have equal time as the staff report takes, with a minimum of 15 minutes. And then it's a minimum of 5 minutes for rebuttal, with 1 minute of rebuttal time for each person who gives public testimony. And then after that, if the government or hearing body asks questions of staff, that the applicant also get a chance to respond to those questions. And we did not have any public testimony to this. And again, just because it offers the time does not mean that an applicant would need to take the time. So we have made no changes since the recommendation was originally submitted.
All right, thank you, Natalie. And this one's near and dear to my heart as a person who advocates in land use hearings. It is very frustrating when you go through a whole hearing and then a decision maker closes the hearing and then proceeds to have a discussion with the staff about a topic that no one has talked about before, and you can't say anything. That is a rough way to operate things, and this is a pretty good fix. So any further discussion on the topic? then I'd accept the motion.
So
I am
moved.
grant tentative vote. I second Eric's motion.
All right, moved by Eric, seconded by Dan. Any further discussion before we do the roll call vote? All right, Matt, go ahead with the vote, please.
Councilmember Bunn,
Aye.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you, folks. And the last recommendation that we have for the third reading is modifying allowable standards for local tree codes. I've seen both Justin and Natalie off mute. I'm not sure I'm kicking it to.
I'm gonna let Justin take it.
All right, fantastic.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Natalie. So I for members of the HPAC, I did send out a kind of a letter addressing some of the comments that we'd heard, and I do realize that this is a very sensitive subject and one that a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings on. We received over 300 pages of testimony, I think today, that I scrolled through, and not just today, but the ones in the past. A lot of them were focused on trees. One in particular that caught my attention today was one that kind of summed up some of the challenges that we deal with on trees. It was one in particular from a person who testified and said they did not support any expansion of the urban growth boundary, that they believed that density was the key to our housing crisis, but then they also said they did not want to see any weakening of the tree code provisions. And so, and honestly, and I'm not trying to make light of that, but that is, as somebody who does small, compact infill development, that is the challenge that we face. Is I think it was submitted with our recommendation, and that was something that we're dealing with on a firsthand basis. I live this daily when I look at stuff, is that we're trying to do middle housing on small lots in cities, and we are constantly being faced with tree codes that make it very difficult to do that. And so I realize that this is a sensitive topic, but I also realize that if we're going to make a choice to have a tight urban growth boundary and promote infill and density, that this is something that we have to kind of provide, in some respects, almost provide some cities covers on to allow for the kind of development that they ask for. So I ask for the support on this only because I think this is something that we need to do if we're going to try to meet the housing goals of our state.
All right, thank you, Justin. Let's open it up to the full HPAC. Any questions, comments, thoughts, discussion that folks would like to have on this recommendation? Alyssa, go right ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I've given this one a lot of thought as somebody who spent my whole life working for city, county, or local government, and reading all the testimony from the local governments, the arborists. We just voted on a bunch of things to make it easier to move past local government barriers. But I am moved by the testimony of not just the city of Portland story, but the larger sort of Oregon frame that we're using here. So I've asked myself over and over, am I going to vote yes or no on this one? And I have a lot of respect for Justin, the work he does, and frankly, the issues that you're raising around buildable lands, I think are significant. But I thought about the role of this committee, and the role of this committee is to move ideas forward for further discussion, for further consideration, for further legislation. So even though I want to speak up and say that I think local governments in this case have a lot of good reasons why they need to have the tree codes and the ability to have control over tree codes, I still think I'm gonna vote for the conversation to continue because I think that's the work of the group. So I just wanted to say that before we got to the vote.
All right, thank you, Alyssa. That's really good framing, and I appreciate your rationale. I got Dan and then Natalie, please.
Well, you stole the good ideas I was going to say, but I agree. We're voting to move this forward, and we're calling attention to the fact that local tree ordinances are an impediment. If something is adopted ultimately by the legislature, I doubt it's going to be exactly the text that is written here. And so I've been thinking, well, what are some other ways we could do this to find a middle ground? Do you say, well, let's look at a ratio of the protection zone to the lot, or let's look at, some other things. There's lots of different ways that this can be massaged to try and help those competing goals. But the conversation that we need to have, and the one that we are prompting with this recommendation, is that Oregon's land use system is based on the premise that when you're inside the UGB, it's going to urbanize, and we have to allow urbanization, and urbanization means change. And with good planning, we can balance those competing interests. But if we say that you come into the UGB, but land has to remain static, that is going to put pressure on expanding the UGB. And that is something that we really don't want to do here in Oregon. Even people all across the spectrum, that's an Oregon value that, hey, the UGB exists, and, for better or for worse, that's the system that we have. And I'm proud of it. So I am all for moving this conversation forward, knowing that really the value here is promoting the conversation of, we have to let urban areas urbanize if we want to serve our citizens, if we want density and all the other good stuff that comes along with density. So I appreciate I wasn't on this committee, but you guys waded through an awful lot of stuff, and I really appreciate it. And I think it's worth moving forward.
All right, thank you, Dan. Go ahead, Natalie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the nuances that one of the things that's important about this recommendation is that it states that an arborist report would have to be the governing document about how a tree is protected. And that's very important because currently under the City of Salem's tree code, you're only allowed to go into the critical root zone a certain percentage, 30%, regardless of what the arborist report states. And so we are having to apply to remove trees that we could save based on an arborist report because we are going too far into that root zone. And so that's something that I think is important that's within this recommendation. And the other thing that I think is important in this recommendation is that it doesn't penalize a development for providing the improvements that are required. So you're not penalized for having to put through a road that the city is requiring or any other type of utilities. So you're allowed to remove trees within the right of way. I actually think if we can have these two controls, if we can follow what the arborist says and get closer to the tree, I think more trees will be saved than if we just stuck to a really, stringent critical root zone. But I can understand the public testimony. I mean, I love trees too. My son's nursery, famous trees. But the truth of the matter is that they really are a problem when it comes to putting homes in an urban environment, and you can't creative solution your way around it. I just have so many examples, but I will stop talking now.
Thank you, Natalie. Much appreciated. And I think Margaret, you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Director Bateman after.
Thank you, Co-Chair Hall. I think I've struggled with this one as well, and I appreciate, Alyssa, your framing of the struggle internally of how to think about this. What kind of helped me decide I'm going to support this moving forward is the recognition that our climate change is only going to get worse if we can't address the housing problem, and the two are linked. And I think, yes, it's easy to say, well, this tree and that tree or this cluster of trees needs to be preserved. At the same time, if we don't get a handle and quick on our housing problems, there's going to be a whole lot more that happens that's bad and accelerates climate change and all the bad that comes with it. And so I think the greater good, in my mind, weighing kind of the pros and cons of this one, is we got to get serious about housing, and that in itself will help with our climate goals. So I'm going to support this one.
Thank you. All right, Director Bateman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, this is heart-wrenching. So I wanted to offer a different path because I know, based on your comments, there's still quite a bit of internal anguish around this. I thank you for the comments about where we put our development. Yes, we're trying to direct our development into town, into cities for a number of reasons. That's why our land use planning program is in place, in place today. But I do think that this particular recommendation as written doesn't go far enough to ensure the removal of a tree is warranted or sufficiently mitigated. So while I do want this conversation to continue, I think I'm going to push back and say, not with this particular language. Maybe could we try again? We still have a little bit of time. It's not December 31st. If we could work on this a bit more and get some clarity about when the removal is warranted and how we could mitigate for it when we do see removal, I would feel much better about that. So I'm going to offer a different path for those of you who are still not feeling great. Maybe we put a hold on this one and continue just a little bit more work around the language. I'll be a no today.
All right, thank you, Director Bateman. Riley, go ahead. Oh, you're still on mute, Riley.
I'm a tree lover, but every living thing has a lifespan. And I don't think that the current codes look at what the lifespan of that tree is. The tree that you're going to remove may be on its last legs. It may be well into its lifespan. And so I think you should consider that, and the mitigation will be that you can plant additional trees when you landscape, because the tree may be gone anyway.
Thank you. Good practical considerations, Riley. Absolutely. So Senator Jama, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I really appreciate this conversation, and for the sake of having more dialogue for this issue, I will be also abstaining today for this vote.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any more comments? Just for the record, my thinking on this is we're really only talking about trees on private property that are in the footprint of where housing is immediately about to be built. The perimeter, the periphery of the property, trees. The right of way, when you think about all those nice neighborhoods where the trees go over the street and connect together, not touching those. Parks where people go to recreate and find shade and expect to have tree cover, not touching those. So, I think we've done a good job of hearing what people have to say, trying to narrowly tailor this. But, it is understandable that there is a whole world of folks who, can take a look at tree canopy or trees in the abstract and say, hey, let's try and save as many as possible. It's just, I think that we've gotten down and focused on which trees are really the ones that are, within our bailiwick of housing production and where those two things intersect. So I appreciate the recommendation in that regard. Tom, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a clarifying factor or a question for Justin, please, which is, has there been any amendment, or is it still only within the UGB, only on lots 6,000 square feet or smaller? It does not apply to any endangered species, and only of a tree caliper of what size or less, please?
So the current recommendation is for 48 inches or less. I think there's been considerable testimony and consideration whether or not 48 is the correct number. 36 might be the correct number. I think it's somewhere between 48 and 36. Recognizing that this is going to go to the legislature, there might be some movement on that. You're right. It is on 6,000 lots, 6,000 square feet or smaller, or subdivisions that average 6,000 square feet or less or smaller that have basically small lot subdivisions. So we are not talking large lot subdivisions. or large lot parcels. This is basically on your smaller projects. And most of these are, and it's also important to note that these are, I think even in the recommendation, it says where density is being increased. So on the infill side of things, if you were simply tearing a house down to build one in its place, that this would not be into effect. So if you were tearing a house down, you'd have to at least be putting a couple back in its place, kind of trying to achieve the density goals and whatnot if we're trying to achieve. So that's kind of where we're at right now. The endangered and heritage trees is part of that. So and again, it's only a temporary recommendation to go along with the 10-year the recommendation.
So they're exempted,
Correct.
endangered, you cannot cut them down.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I move approval unless there's further discussion.
I would second that.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Moved and seconded. Then now's an opportunity for further discussion.
If I might, I just want to commend the team on plowing through all this work. Like you said, there's more than 300 pages of testimony. We had a lot of even op-eds written about it, and I really think that the nuance of the proposal is not, doom and gloom. It's, we're not cutting down all the trees or recommending trees get cut down across the entire, urban landscape. It's about very specific restrictions that are hindering housing production. And so I love trees too. I love trees. I'm a landscape architect by training. And so I just want to commend the team for work going through this and putting in the due diligence and nuance into this to make it really targeted towards housing production and not just going after trees. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Anybody else? We're in the discussion before the voting. Right, hearing none, I'll turn it over to Matt. Please do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Flagan.
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler.
I said I'd vote yes. I'm voting yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Abstain.
Senator Anderson.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
No.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tubby.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you, folks. That is the last of our recommendations that are the third reading. It is precisely 3 o'clock according to my computer here. So I'm thinking we take a 10-minute break and then come back, and we've got a number of first reading recommendations. Thank you to the council and thank you to the work groups for all the great work in drafting and communication that went into the recommendations here. So let's come back at 3:10. I'll see folks then. Thanks. Folks, I got 3:10 by my clock. Welcome back from the break. Thank you for the good work before the break. Now we're going to roll up our sleeves and do some first readings. And we're going to start off with codes and design. And Natalie, are you going to present the CFAC recommendation?
I am, with the help of Deb.
All right, fantastic. I'm seeing, a number of screens flickering back to life here. We may want to give everybody, 15, 20 more seconds to settle back in, but then let's go ahead and kick things off. I think we have critical mass.
Okay. So early in some of our meetings, we were hearing from a lot of city staff that they were really worried about having additional regulations placed on them because they were already grappling with trying to figure out how to implement the regulations that were already put on them between ONA and CFEC. And so that kind of led us to look into that a little bit more. They were also saying that they were having a hard time with staff time in order to really devote to implementing these rules, because with their current workload of trying to assist projects that will produce housing, they were having to pull time away in order to make sure that they could implement these rules properly. At one point, I believe we heard testimony that said that confusion about these rules could lead to regulation that would have the impact of basically causing a moratorium on housing. And so that's what led to the crafting of this recommendation, which basically says that we need to pause CTEC momentarily CFEC, is the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities executive order that was signed by Governor Kate Brown. And so this says we need to pause CFEC rules in order to ensure that the rules that we're putting in place for CFEC align with the ONA policies and that they're not actually going to hinder development of housing. Specifically, there's concern, and there's a lot of testimony in the recommendation centered around the vehicle miles traveled component of CFEC. There's been a lot of questions for that. This recommendation also states that there should be funding for cities in order to devote staff time towards putting together the regulations and implementing them, so that they're not having to take staff time away from actual housing projects. So Deb, do you want to kind of take it from there?
Thanks, Natalie. I would just add that we did have 4 specific cities that actually provided feedback and actually gave examples of the conflict that they're having to gain clarity on and having to make decisions, and it's resulting in many, many hours of calculations that are not adding up, so they're not sure how to move forward. And that was from the city of Bend. It was from the city of Beaverton, city of Wilsonville, and city of Hillsborough. And so I think that the significance is that we do need to, as we're going through the ONA process right now, and the DLCD is focused on, and Dr. Bateman has been very focused on making sure that we are looking at ways that we can create housing production, that this would be an opportunity for them to take advantage of looking at this at the same time. And then if there needs to be any changes, they could make it. Any other questions?
Open it up to the group. Questions, thoughts, discussion. This is again, we're in the first reading context, so we'll be getting a whole bunch of testimony on these, and have a couple opportunities to consider them at future meetings as well. All right, hearing none, let's hop to the next recommendation. Thank you both, Deb and Natalie, much appreciated, as well as everyone on the code and design work group. I think this is a good example of how that process brought forth some issues that weren't even on the voluminous list of recommendations that we started with. So we heard from local governments and how some of the things were not intersecting. So looking forward to more testimony on CFEC recommendations when it comes back for round 2. And now I think we've got Daniel on to talk about a couple recommendations that finance has brought forth.
Good afternoon. Here's the finance recommendations. At any point during my discussion, my finance colleagues are more than welcome to jump in and comment on things that I might miss. The first one that we're submitting, quite honestly, we've cribbed straight from the owner recommendations to the legislature from last year, and that's to create a statewide, a state cabinet level agency overseeing housing production. The report went into excruciating detail about how there's no one central place where housing is their primary responsibility, and that has authority to cut across bureaucracy at the state level. And we endorse that proposition and that solution. It's a big government, and there needs to be a consolidation of power somewhere when it comes to pushing housing forward. We quote extensively from the owner report, but there are a couple of minor tweaks that we recommend. If you look on the second page, there's a table that in the report that talks about the different agencies that should have parts wrapped up into it. We also think it's important to have DHS and OHA be part of that. There's a significant component to housing that needs to have some coordination with DHS and OHA. We also think there's some tie-ins there with the higher education folks. Having said that, I know you've all probably read the report extensively, early on, and are quite familiar with it. So I will stop there and ask if there's questions or if there's other things from members of my group that they'd like to add. Seeing none.
All right. So
we move to this. Okay. The next one will earn me the ire of every local jurisdiction. So please don't shoot the messenger and hear me out. We know that SDCs are a problem. So if you think very basically about the mandate is to provide recommendations that will help housing production, if we waived SDCs, there would be more housing. Now, I know that sounds really obvious and maybe not like a practical solution, but here's how our thinking goes. We don't have a lot of capital or effort thrown at 60 to 120% AMI. And I know a lot of different groups have been kicking it around, but especially finance. And when you get into 60 to 120, SDCs are a material amount of cost. In some jurisdictions, it can run to be 10% of the cost of getting a new unit brought online. If we could make those SDCs go away, it would significantly help bring more units into production. This recommendation stops right there. But the two logical questions that come along after that is, are you just going to make local jurisdictions eat that deficit, or are you going to fund it from somewhere? And that is a separate policy discussion to have. And we have other recommendations coming along that talk about, if you were to fund something like this, how would you fund it? But keeping this one very, very simple and sticking to our mandate, if we were to have a moratorium or complete waiver on SDCs, that would significantly help increase housing production. So I will stop there and ask if there are any questions. You can read our detailed analysis. There's also a head note on that recommendation. We think the final HPAC report needs to have a little discussion about the externalities of bringing additional housing online. So we know that if you build a unit, it's good for the builder, it's good for the people moving into the house. But there's also lots of other benefits that flow to a community by having housing production. And putting some discussion and some quantification around that will be helpful, especially for a recommendation like this. We are tracking that data down, and so if we can get it in time in a workable way, we'll bring that back as an amendment to this recommendation or maybe somewhere else in the final report. But we didn't want to hold that up from getting this to public comment. So that every city in the state can tell us, if you yank our SDCs, we can't build anything. We know that. The other thing is, if we go down a route like this, it clearly has to be a stopgap measure. We have to find a better way of doing infrastructure construction and funding. So this would almost certainly need to be paired with a good long-term solution for funding infrastructure. We've gotten into the trap of relying on SDCs too heavily, I think is the consensus of the committee and many people who look at it. And so if there was a genuine commitment to funding infrastructure a different way, getting rid of SDCs immediately would have an immediate impact on housing but we'd have to know that there was some other source of funding coming. So I'll stop there and look for questions. Mr. Cody, this is his baby, so I'll let Tom speak.
Oh,
to it.
it is. That was. I just want to clarify, and if it is, then it's the one that's limited to 120. Is it limited to 120%
This is
AMI or
limited to
below?
120, the one that's submitted here.
Okay, so I want to call that to the council's attention, my colleague's attention. So there would be a proposed 10-year deed restriction in exchange for an affordability requirement for middle income or affordable, capital A, capital H affordable. And then two just other points that were the data Daniel's referring to. The indication is from National Home Building Association data that the reoccurring revenue from one multifamily housing unit, the reoccurring positive economic impact of building one multifamily housing unit average across the country is $39,000 per unit per year. So disregarding all of the economic benefits and permit fees and jobs created to build that unit, et cetera, that to us on the finance committee was very compelling. The second thing I'd like to bring to your attention is the city of Portland recently did, as you may know, an inclusional study, a review of the inclusionary housing program within the city. And that report recommended one of the biggest levers that the city could pull if they were so inclined was to increase the waiver program that they currently have available for units 60% and below to a higher level of income and a higher level of to move it up the income spectrum. So there is quite a bit of work and research that's been done around this issue. So we believe that this could dramatically increase production. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dan. And Tom, any further discussion on this recommendation before we get to other recommendations up for first reading?
All right, the third one from finance is also relatively simple, but is an acknowledgement that we need to do more for 60 to 120%. So committee's recommending creating a $300 million fund to provide gap financing for middle income or workforce housing. As you all know, there's lots of resources available at 60% AMI and below, and that is simply because that's where the federal government puts LIHTC funding. And then we kind of follow on to that. You go to 61 and above and the funding drops off a cliff. But we know that in that 60 to 120% band is where about a third of our housing need is. And it's still not affordable for people. Just because we say affordable 60, we need to reframe that conversation and know that there's a big chunk right here. And the simplest, most direct way to do it is to provide direct capital subsidies. We've seen that with LIFT. I know LIFT had the virtue of unlocking additional LIHTC funding so we could fully subscribe, but we know that there is a gap between what project can service on its own and what it costs to build. And if we want to have more housing built in that band, direct capital subsidies will be required. This recommendation does not speak about the form of that subsidy. Is it a check? Is it a loan guarantee? Is it, financing? That's not the important part. The important part is we believe there needs to be a commitment to funding 60 to 120% AMI projects. So other members of the committee feel like there's anything else that needs to be elaborated on for that?
I've said I appreciate that framing, and there's been such a ongoing discussion around affordable housing, and it's something that is very familiar to talk about, and that everyone at the legislature and state understand as a public good and the need to invest in. But once you start sort of pushing the edge of that, there's not a big difference in demographics at 58% AMI and 65% AMI. you know, these are very similar folks. Yeah, there's some amount of buying power there, but it's not a different lifestyle.
It's
And
not huge. And one of the things, and this would require, you know, significant amount of economic study to quantify it into a good model. But for any given dollar of subsidy that we allocate, if we're subsidizing it 100%, we'll be able to get more units. So as AMI goes up, that gap should decrease, and to a certain extent, we'll get more bang for our buck. Not saying that we should defund 60% or deeply affordable units, but we do need to acknowledge that housing is a spectrum and we should fund across the entire deficit. And the funding that's required when we get to, you know, 100% AMI might not be as bad as we all think. I mean, we might be able to make some significant progress there without dropping in as much of a capital requirement as we think we might have to.
If I could, Daniel, a question I have, and I'm looking at the externalities and unknowns while you're saying this, or reading it off. I question the efficacy over time. And so if we provided, you know, if we provided $25,000 to $40,000 stipend, how long would it take just for the market to absorb that and then kind of go away net at the end anyway? Or expect it? You know what I mean?
No, that's an excellent question. I don't have an answer for you right now, but yes.
all right, well, those are the kind of questions we want at a first reading.
And someone will answer it in reading number 2, I'm sure, with some very well thought out testimony. So.
All right, good deal. Anything further on this recommendation?
Danielle, Deb Flagan, if there's an opportunity to actually look at what the area median income is at 100% or 120% in each one of our counties, just to give us an idea, I think it would be helpful. Because in many of our rural communities, I think it is,
Not
it's
as much as you think.
very, exactly. And to build a house or to build, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's affordable. I mean, if it's an affordable housing house or a house in general, it's very difficult. At 60%, I mean, the area median income could be, you know, something like $45,000. So it's, I mean, I think it just gives us a good range of understanding why we would want to go to 120. That's what I'm getting at.
I think that's a great idea. So unless there's objection, I would ask unanimous consent to attach an appendix to this that gives the AMIs for the state by county, because I think that's really good context to have for as this document goes on and other people are reading it who might not be thinking about that.
I would maybe even just add to that is the median house price for sale for those individual counties as well. And I use, you know, Umatilla County as an example. I'm going off from memory, but I believe AMI here was about 40. It went from like $48,000 to $52,000 over the last 5 years. But house sales went from 180 to 360. So there's the mismatch is not necessarily whether or not people are making more money, but the house price jumped too. So it's the distance that has changed, not necessarily the capacity.
Got it. Additional context forthcoming.
Nice.
I will recommend that we add to that, if we're doing a chart with county incomes, house prices, let's do average 2-bedroom rent rates as well. And I don't see OHCS staff on the call, but I'm hoping we can get some staff support for that one.
Yep.
Thank you.
Right on. All right, good discussion and good additions. Anything more on the middle income housing fund recommendation? All right, I believe that's it from our finance work group. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, members of the work group. I know we've got a whole lot more coming our way from your group, and looking forward to it, as well as looking forward to shepherding these recommendations through the second and third readings. So let's keep charging ahead. Land development permit applications work group. Am I kicking it back to Eric?
Yep.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead, please.
All right. So we really didn't know where we're heading with these recommendations actually, one of our recommendations was basically fix the ODOT problem, and so we didn't really know exactly how to do it or what to do. So it took some investigation, and I think we came up with two, really positive approaches to solve what is, for many developers, kind of it's a showstopper in terms of proceeding on a project. If there's a big ODOT project, you go, you know what, I think I'll go elsewhere. And so we wanted to see if we could sort of at least begin to sort of bend that curve. And it's appropriate that I'm coming right after Daniel, because this is really a kind of a blend between the finance committee and our committee. So Daniel gave me the blessing to send it out from our committee, but since I sit on finance too, I think it's okay. Yeah, Daniel. So the first one is ODOT to be additionally funded $20 million per year to create an immediate housing opportunity fund to support housing production through roadway improvements to support the significant housing unit production over the next 10 years. Cost sharing with private developers and or cities should be encouraged in order to leverage the fund to a maximum extent possible. Note that the actual dollar amount should be considered a placeholder until economic analysis indicates whether this level of funding is sufficient. So, in a nutshell, what we're talking about is projects all across the state that are potentially and likely partially funded through SDCs. They're on the project list, but they need more funding at the state level because of budget constraints that currently exist with ODOT, that essentially would provide an additional source of funding when housing could be shown to be benefited by, the classic example, we use a traffic signal, that if you can have a $1.5 million traffic signal put in, it would, permit the construction of, 100 housing units. And sometimes the city might have, from our research, might have it 45% funded. There might be some contribution from the developer side, but this would provide ODOT that additional sort of funding to be able to make sure that those kind of projects could actually make it through. So we had really, really positive interactions with ODOT. I was just extremely pleased with how they were helping to sort of craft this, and that is sort of the basics of our first recommendation.
All right, folks.
If there are any questions. Yeah.
All right, Robert,
yeah,
please.
Very glad to see this. I've had my own experiences with ODOT, which I won't go into too much depth. But what I'll say is that the dollar amount you initially identified as a drop in the bucket. Our project and requirements of ODOT, once we got through permitting, for one project was, close to 5 million. So, and again, I know that number is a plug number. And then I know there's other ODOT kind of recommendations. So one, thrilled to see that there's some resources putting this way toward, this effort. And also, hopefully, that eventually also will be coupled with timely permitting and, and even their review process and kind of what that looks like. There's a larger discussion, obviously, with ODOT, but I think this is a great first step. So thanks, Eric.
Any other questions? All right. Will you tee this up for me, Mr. Justice, in terms of our next recommendation? Because that's exactly what it is sort of the hoping to improve the process and get ODOT on team housing, so that we're actually, they have that as a sort of a high priority. So I'll just read it just so in case you haven't seen it yet. All proposed housing projects which exceed 15 units and which will require ODOT design review as part of the development permit shall be elevated to priority status for prompt review. Additionally, residential projects which require ODOT review as part of a land use action, most often when exceeding a threshold of daily trips, shall be elevated to priority status. Priority status means that ODOT will assign a focused and specialized team of engineers and reviewers to fast track the project review with a single point of contact for fast and reliable customer service.
Love, love, love. Thank you.
Any questions?
Natalie, go right ahead.
I just think this is a really important recommendation because even something as simple as a driveway access permit from ODOT can cause a really big delay. So having a special group within ODOT to look at housing related projects, I think is going to be very, very helpful.
All right. Anything further on this recommendation? Getting ODOT into the customer service business. All right, hearing none. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Land Development and Permit Application Work Group, for those recommendations. Again, they'll be coming back at our next meeting and we'll be getting testimony on those and looking to get those through the process. So last and not least by any stretch of the imagination is the recommendation from the Land Availability Work Group. And I'll turn it over to Deb to talk about public lands for affordable housing.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I would like to ask Joel Madsen if he would be willing to present on this.
Be happy to, Deb.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah. So we are bringing forward a recommendation that's really, I see it as like a sister recommendation to the state-owned lands for housing production that we saw earlier on in the process of this HPAC. And this one's more broadly leveraging publicly owned property for housing production. We heard a lot of feedback in the state-owned lands discussion about the importance of public lands more broadly, and I think we're emphasizing that the importance of moving this separate recommendation alongside that. So you'll see a lot of similarities, but again, this is focused on the broader context of publicly owned lands. So we're recommending, again, similar to what we recommend in the state-owned lands recommendation, that we expand and extend the executive order to include the production of housing units. OEM is already doing mapping of publicly owned parcels through a separate executive order, and we'd like to include, again, not only the state lands, but also more broadly the publicly owned lands in that inventory of publicly owned lands. We are recommending that DAS expand their asset management enterprise to really dive into that analysis of potential housing production, again, on publicly owned lands, and the direction of analyzing co-locations of public services like public works that can be created between state and local governments. And then also just oversee and acknowledge that equitable disposition process for divesting properties that may be suitable for housing production. State-owned lands allow for right of first option. We are recommending that that should be applied to publicly owned lands more broadly. We are recommending to be clear that we allow local agencies to write down the cost of land and to provide additional subsidy to provide that additional subsidy to affordable housing. A recommendation also includes precluding municipalities or special districts, local governments, et cetera, from charter or ordinance or other local legislation that could require additional processes to surplus or lease public land for housing development. And then finally, ensuring by right affordable housing on publicly owned land through legislation which also precludes municipalities from creating local legislation that could require additional processes for the permitting. There's been a lot of work on this last bullet point. It's not quite to the point of by right on publicly owned lands for housing production. Again, we know the housing production issue that's before us. Here are just examples of, look, we want to expand on some of the work that we're doing and really take it to this next level. And we're acknowledging the needs that are identified in the Oregon Housing Needs Assessment. This would be implemented, of course, with special districts, people who own public land, but also through the governor's office, the legislature, OEM, if they're the responsible entity for inventory mapping, DAS, again, around their asset management approach, and obviously state agencies, particularly in looking at the co-location opportunities, but also, really looking at how we're leveraging investments, maybe around capital facilities planning that could also encourage housing production on those publicly owned lands. Our recommendation that it serves the housing needs that are identified. And we acknowledge that the most challenging or unmet need that we continue to see around the state are those earning less than 60% of the area median income. Okay, analysis of how can we measure how effective it is reporting out on, what sites in the inventory have been identified as suitable. Has there been disposition for what, to who, as far as affordable housing developer? And then ultimately, how many housing units are we producing and at particular income levels across the state with this recommendation? To watching out for unintended consequences. Again, we're not trying to usurp the priority for housing production around homelessness. That also requires a state emergency response. So we're not, we don't want this to be in competition for that. We hope that it leverages onto that existing work. We acknowledge that, state agencies and other publicly owned parcels have been purchased and have a reason, for a public purpose, and they have mission delivery. And so we're encouraging that creativity around how can we still achieve that mission while also working collectively toward this goal of housing production. We acknowledge that, the right of first option to go to housing production could be a disincentive to navigate that surplus property. We want to be careful about that. I think one of the pieces about our recommendation is we kind of acknowledge that in, precluding additional processes, but still, we want to be careful that we're just really not disincentivizing leveraging that public property for housing. We consulted with quite a few SMEs, certainly the land availability work group had folks participating. I want to call out a few in particular. Portland Community College, I would say they've been leading the charge in production of affordable housing on their publicly owned lands in their campus. And we're really, I'd say, supportive of this recommendation to create clarity for how they could leverage and others could leverage public lands for housing. We consulted with Association of Special Districts, certainly DLCD staff, and Oregon Public Property Managers Group as well. I'm happy to take any questions that folks may have on this leveraging publicly owned property for housing production recommendation.
All right. Thank you so much, Joel. Really appreciate that. And questions, comments, thoughts, discussion. All right, we will be talking more about this in future meetings and future readings, but really great work putting that all together. Deb, go right ahead, please.
I was just going to say that this was actually one of the initial recommendations that were in the framework. And so we've actually been working on this since the initial recommendation that we put forward with the state lands. And so thank you, Joel, for the information. And I think the added time has put together a better recommendation.
Fantastic. All right. I think we're at the end of our agenda as far as recommendations go, unless there's anything else on the recommendations that folks want to discuss. So the last thing we have is just a quick rundown from Matt on next steps, and then we're gonna adjourn.
All right, thanks, Co-Chair Hall. Just to give a preview, our next meeting is not until the 27th of October. So it'll be our last meeting in October. We're still currently looking at the November schedule. We know we've got some tentative dates out there. We're also trying to get a sense of the recommendations in process. And so I think I'm getting a good sense of that. As far as what's made it out of the work groups, just to forecast ahead, we have 2 recommendations that are set up for third readings. So discussion and vote. We have 10 recommendations that are set up for second readings, so public comment. And then we have 6 recommendations that are set up to have a first reading that have been submitted late this week, but did not get it in last week before we posted for this meeting. So still 18 in process at the full council. I know that there are quite a few still in process at the work group level. So I'll be reaching out to just kind of get that sense so I can help support the co-chairs in making sure that we're appropriately scheduling at the end of the year. So that's all I've got, Co-Chair Hall, Co-Chair Tubby.
Fantastic. JD, anything for the group before we wrap this up?
No, good work. We're 13 minutes ahead of schedule. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, as always, appreciate the great work of the council and, you know, spending your Friday afternoon here with us, advancing this process. Thank you so much for all the thoughtful discussion and efficient moving things forward so we can progress on this. And thank you for the work that is going to happen in the next 2 weeks at the work group level before we're back here again to talk about some more recommendations. I know the number of recommendations and the velocity are increasing, and we are in kind of the Q4 final stretch. We'll knock this out by the end of the year. Really appreciate everybody's help, and have a wonderful weekend and take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.